Okay, so where we ended last time was talking about how blessings could be more than just the simple or the good things in life, right? That I think God wants bigger and deeper things for us. I mean, he wants good things, but I also know that he wants more than that. So right away, we're going to get into the Bible. Can everybody turn to Daniel 6, please? Chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. In Daniel 6, shockingly enough, we'll talk about Daniel. In verses 1 through 3, we'll just go ahead and read it. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel was so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. There are several interesting statements right there in the first 3 verses. The first thing is so that the king might not suffer loss. This is implying that there was probably a lot of loss, right? Previously to creating this new system that he had governing his lands and properties. Probably there was some skimming off of the top, and so now you have these people, satraps, that manage small areas of the country, and then an overseer that would manage, if there's 3 overseers and 120 satraps, they're each managing about 40 satraps, right? So let's say 40 provinces each of these guys are managing. Now, we know that back then the tax collectors skimmed off the top or over-collected taxes or whatever because they lived the high life. So this is probably similar to what's going on here. So the satraps are skimming off the top, and then when the overseers come, the overseers are probably skimming off the top, but that's not happening in Daniel's section, right? Daniel is being reliable. Daniel is being honest. Daniel is doing the job that he's been asked to do properly and honestly. And so whenever you have one section of your country bringing in a certain amount and one section being managed honestly, or maybe even judgments that Daniel was having to do, I'm not sure all of their duties, but whatever it was, one section of your country is happy and prosperous, and there's so much more taxes being collected, or that's being turned in at least, and you have all these other sections that that's not happening to. The king immediately saw the difference and said, I'm just going to put Daniel in charge of all of it. That had to be a lot of political maneuvering going on with his other overseers and with the other satraps. Okay? They were angry. They were not able to do all that they were wanting to do. Angry that the king was going to put him over. They weren't going to be able to keep skimming or keep being dishonest the way that they were. They wanted, at the end of the day, they wanted Daniel out. And they couldn't do it because he was honest, so they couldn't catch him in any of the things that they were guilty of themselves. And so they went to the king. And they said, they schemed. And they figured out a way to make Daniel be blamed for things. Have you ever been in a position like this at work? Or even in your family where you were reviled, talked about, slandered? Were you rejected? Maybe even underappreciated? Or undermined? Daniel was in that position, and yet his perspective never changed. They knew that they could only catch him in the one thing he held dear, his relationship and devotion to God. In fact, verse 5 tells us, finally these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So, they had a law created that no one could pray to any god. They could only pray to King Darius for 30 days. Daniel, being the prayer warrior that he was, didn't follow that law. He still went to his room 3 times a day and prayed to God every day, without fail. These actions, this devotion, this choosing God over all things, even, the danger that he put himself in, knowing that he was reviled, this got him arrested, questioned, and thrown into the lion's den. Now, I want you to understand, this is the Persians and the Medes, okay, this culture. They're a very warlike culture. They have a lot of ways to kill their prisoners. This is the most shameful. This is the lowest of the low. It's not even worth a spectacle. They didn't even call in anybody to see it. It wasn't done in a public square. It wasn't anything. They were taking a human and reducing them to a food product for a vicious pet. Okay? This was the scheming men, this was their very last statement to Daniel. That you weren't even worth an entertainment to us. These are the guys he worked with every day in and day out. This was betrayal. This was meanness. It was hurt on purpose. This is Daniel's lowest moment. Having not only to face the fear of the lion's den, but also facing that his co-workers truly disliked him this much. But after the lion's den, the law was changed. Daniel 6:26 and 27 tells us King Darius's response when Daniel comes out of the lion's den, safe, whole, and completely unharmed. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. And his kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions, and Daniel prospered. Do you see how the experience of vicious co-workers, the fear of death, the fear of law breaking, and being thrown into the lion's den became Daniel and therefore Israel's greatest blessing? They would not have experienced the freedom that they now have post-lion's den that they didn't have before. Daniel had to go to his room to pray. So although there wasn't laws against it, there was not protections either. And now there were. Let's go to Daniel chapter 3. And we're going to see how this concept of some of the worst experiences turn into the best things. In Daniel chapter 3, we have King Nebuchadnezzar that built an image of gold of himself. It uses like weird cubits and stuff like that, but somebody a long time ago and much smarter than me says that approximately it's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide of gold. I don't know how you get gold to be that heavy. I would think the feet would crush, based on how it could support weight. But however they did it. That's a lot of gold. That's a big statue. That's somebody with a little bit of an ego problem, possibly. I mean, maybe pointing out the obvious. But we could say that Nebuchadnezzar had a little bit of a God complex, right? I want everyone to know who I am because it's almost 100 feet high and 9 feet wide. And he made a law. After his gold statue of himself was installed, he gathered all of his satraps and overseers and governors and told them that whenever they hear the sound of the flute or the horn or anything with stringed instruments, all kinds of music, wherever they were in the city, they would have to turn to the gold statue and bow down to it. Now let's put that into perspective, right? That means that wherever you were in the city, you must have been able to see the gold statue. Yeah. That's a big statue. You can see it over the buildings, right? He wanted his image to be part of your landscape. You couldn't escape this statue. You couldn't escape bowing down to it. There wasn't TV, there wasn't radio, there was, the local watering hole, right, that you literally got water at, and music. That's how people entertained themselves. So walking down the street, if your neighbor was playing guitar in his house, everyone that heard the music would have to randomly drop down and bow down to the statue. Can you imagine how that wouldn't work in regular life? They used horns to call the sheep in. Merchants used guitars to draw in customers. Can you imagine a city full of music and life and all this kind of stuff that ground to a big silent halt? Because if you tried to draw your customers in with your guitar, They couldn't buy anything because everyone around you was now bowing. And if you were 30 feet away and you didn't hear the music and the other 30 people are bowing, you would bow too. Because there was a law that said if you didn't bow, you would get killed. I imagine walking through this city and everyone just going onto the ground every 5 seconds. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a level of ridiculousness that King Nebuchadnezzar has created in this city. And it wasn't just like a fine. You didn't get a fine or arrested and flogged and you could recover. This was death. Thrown into a furnace. The king's furnace, in fact. So he could watch. This is a guy with a big ego problem. Have you ever had somebody with a big ego in your own life? Maybe not to the extreme that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, but have you had somebody that demanded all of your attention all the time? Resented if you didn't give them that attention. They wanted your brain space. They dominated and intruded into your private space and maybe even into your relationships. They butted in. They gave you advice where it wasn't asked for. Have you ever felt wore down by that situation? Maybe worry has done this to you. It wasn't a person. Maybe it's yourself. Has a worry grown and grown and grown until it felt like a 90-foot statue outside of your bedroom window in the middle of the night when you couldn't sleep? Let's read the situation and the response. It's Daniel 3, verses 8 through 18. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, or any kind of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, fine. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your hand, Majesty. But even if he does not, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Even if. That's a famous statement in the Bible. They've even made songs about it. Facing death, they looked at the God of gold outside the window, and they considered the God of light that they worshipped, and they made their choice. They would not let the God of gold dominate their lives any longer. They wouldn't let it take over. They wouldn't submit to the oppression that it had become in their lives and in the city. They wouldn't allow it to steal their faith and their peace, even if it might steal their earthly lives. Let's keep reading. It's verses 19 through 23 of Daniel chapter 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. By the way, I never noticed they wore turbans before. That's fun. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Do you see that God did not save them from going into the furnace? He did not save them from their punishment. He allowed them to succumb to the political forces of their day. He did not save them from fear. He did not save them from worry. He did not save them from doubt. There was no great voice and no great sign that showed them that it would be okay. In fact, they acknowledged that this was an outcome that they possibly expected, even if. He did not even save them from being thrown into the fire. Let's continue. Verses 24 through 30. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into that furnace?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out." So they came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there wasn't even the smell of fire. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So God didn't save them from the experience, from being thrown into the fire, from fear. He just made them fireproof. I want you to see that God is not our fairy godmother. He's not our butler or our maid. He is a good father. And in that is the enormous blessing of being called his child. But there's some realizations that you need to come to in knowing that he is your father, that you have a perfect one. A perfect father has a perspective that is eternal, and yours is not. He does not see discomfort the way that you see it. You see it as a terrible experience. He sees it as a learning experience, a training, a refining, a transformation, a way to reveal the potential of your heart, a sloughing off of all the hindrances that weigh you down. He does not and will not waste the hurt. He may not save you from the fire. You may have to walk through it. You may have to deal with tough situations at work. You may have to deal with stresses in your family that try your faith and definitely your patience. You may have to face family that questions your loyalties and seeks to strip you of dignity. You may wrestle with the fires of your own doubts, fears, anxieties. He may not save you from those things, but in leaning on him, in allowing yourself to be defined by him in such a way as these 3 boys did, he can make you fireproof. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into a fire, and it turned out to be one of their greatest blessings. Let's look at someone who had an unwillingly tumultuous life. Genesis 16. The very, here at the very beginning. We're going to meet Hagar. Verses 1 through 6 is going to tell us what we need to know about her. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with her and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "She is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, and she fled from her. Y'all, Hagar is put in an untenable position. She's clearly spent some time being taken for granted previous to this story. Because Sarai easily treated her as a commodity. Now that she's pregnant, it sounds like, with a child she didn't ask for, it sounds like we know she began to despise her mistress, so it sounds like there was some mistreatment happening. Now, culturally, this was really common to keep children in the family, okay, to keep them growing up, because children were the next generation. They were who you passed on your wealth to. They were how you held your land. They were the ones that helped you. There was no nursing homes in ancient Genesis, okay? That was how you were taken care of in your age. You were abandoned and left alone when you didn't have children. Children were very important. It was also really common for, we know that Jacob, Leah, and Rachel both had maidservants that Jacob had children with as well. This was common culturally. It was also common culturally that for these women, they were treated like family. They ate at the family table. They stayed in the innermost tents to be protected. They were well fed, well dressed, well taken care of, well loved. But that doesn't seem to be Hagar's situation. There has to be something more going on with Hagar for her to despise her mistress. To be pregnant and still run away into a desert where you know that you don't have food, water, or shelter. The possibility of death was better for Hagar. How can that be? It had to have been a terrible position that she was in. Let's read once more. It's verses 7 through 13. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. And he said to her, you are pregnant, you will give birth to a son. You will call him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. Don't miss the things that we see here, y'all. Hagar, the lowest in her family, the one that's been taken for granted, the one that nobody cared about how she felt, neglected, impregnated, used. She is seen by holy God. She is also given a child of promise. God himself bends down and asks this nobody in her household where she was going. Do you know that Hagar is the only person in the entire Bible that gives a name to God and he accepts it as a title? She wasn't even an Israelite. Everywhere else we see God declaring his name to his people, one of his titles. But here, Hagar, a nobody, an Egyptian slave, the lowest person in her household, used, neglected, and emotionally abandoned, dared to give a name to God, and he accepts it. Here it is for Hagar. Doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't even matter what it feels like. You might be in a dark place. Maybe you've been rejected, hurt, abused, taken advantage of, taken for granted. Put in a situation where you felt like you had no more choices to make. Or that even your purpose had been stolen from you. God still sees you. Running into the wilderness, hopeless and expecting to die, Hagar encountered her God. Her hopelessness became her greatest blessing because it drove her into a wilderness, but it also drove her towards God. Let's talk about Samson. In Judges 13, Samson's parents are told that he will have great strength if his hair is not cut once he is born. Samson does indeed grow up to have great strength and probably really long hair. An example, I can't help it. My brain has images, right? It's probably why I unwillingly dream so much. But like, I envision Samson, so he probably looks like, what's his face in Aquaman? Momoa, thank you. I envision, probably minus the tats, right? I envision like Jason Momoa, okay? Because he's super strong. Jason Momoa is a big guy. And Samson with like Fabio's hair. Do you know what I mean? Sort of flowing behind him. This is desert country. There's not a lot of trees that block the wind like we have here. So it's, coming across pasture lands, right? And his hair is sort of blowing in the breeze, okay? This is how I envision Samson as he sort of proudly struts from town to town. As we see, he goes to different places from Judges 13 to 16, 17-ish, right? So, I can't help myself. I just wanted to share that with you. So Jason Momoa with Fabio hair. He should probably be on the cover of a romance novel. But anyway, so Samson's strutting around. And an example of his great strength, I don't know if everybody knows, but he killed like 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Okay? That sounds like pretty violent. So maybe more violent than Fabio. But the Philistines were trying to arrest him, and he didn't want to be arrested. And so he clearly put up quite a bit of fight. But as he got older, he began to look for a wife. Now, the Bible doesn't say that Samson has a roving eye, but you can kind of gather that from Samson's actions, okay? Because in Judges 14:2, it says that he was attracted to the women of Timnah. Now, Timnah was in the Philistine area. He had no business being there, as it was a place that was filled with the enemies of Israel. But in Verse 3, it tells us that he wanted the women there because, and I quote, "she looks good to me." In his mind, this may have been the only requirement for a good wife. If it wasn't pretty girls that worshipped idols in Timnah, then it was a woman of ill repute. In Gaza, in Judges 16:1, it says that she caught his eye. And then it was Delilah in Judges 16:6. Who is referred to as beautiful. So Samson is led over and over into sin through his eyes. He saw Delilah and was immediately enraptured with her beauty, even though she was a Philistine and had no loyalty to Israel or, as we know, even to Samson. But he married her anyway. She immediately began to hatch ways in which to remove his great strength. In fact, there were several attempts made on Samson's life based on the information that she gave him. And many people look at Samson and go, he's kind of an idiot. He told her that if he tied her with cotton rope or jute rope that he would lose his strength. So then the next day, shocker, he's tied with that rope. And he breaks out of it. And he still stays with her. And I think to myself, I kind of maybe would have left if my spouse was trying to kill me 3 times at one point, right? With the exact same way I told her it could be done. Like, here's your sign. But Samson is confident enough in his own decision that I guess he just imagines that it'll never happen, right? He's secure enough in his own abilities to get out of this that he cannot fathom an outcome that would bring disaster to his door. Plus, she was still pretty, and she must have apologized real nice. Okay, so there's that. But I think of Samson as being just sort of really dumb, right? With this blonde Fabio hair. And that's really prideful of me, right? Because have you ever struggled with money? Raise your hand. Have you ever been 19 and couldn't buy milk at the end of the month? Have you ever been 20 and you and your husband hacked the last hot dog? Or you ate ramen noodles for a week, which is why you don't eat ramen noodles today. Okay? You paid the electric bill, but you ate ramen noodles. Did you ever really think that if you lost one paycheck, you would lose your house? When you're at the point where you're hacking a hot dog, you could lose your house, right? If you got sick. But did you ever really worry about that eventuality? Did you think, I could lose my house? In some way, we're all Samsons. In some way, we take a lot of things for granted. Our health, our jobs, that even when we pay the water bill, that clean water is going to be delivered to our house. There are so many ways that we assume our world will just continue functioning. And I think that's Samson's problem, right? That he just never knew all of the ways that the world works or that God works to make your life work. But Samson's about to learn where true strength comes from. His wife nagged. I think that misrepresents wives across the world. But his wife nagged and nagged and nagged, and he finally told her the truth, cut my hair. So she did. And Samson lost his strength and he's captured. In being captured, they poked out his eyes. This man was the strongest man. He didn't have to rely on anybody. He wasn't afraid to travel in a warring nation between towns. He didn't have to worry about people attacking him. He could overcome. He was independent. He married who he wanted. He went where he wanted. He did what he wanted. But now not only is he weak, he's blind. Losing his strength may have been embarrassing for Samson. He may have struggled wanting to get out of his bonds regularly. But he lost his weakness. He lost his eyes. The very thing that had led him into sin over and over. The very thing that had put him in this position, looking at that beautiful woman of the Philistines. His eyes were gone. Now this created a terrible situation for Samson. The man who killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey now was probably being tripped in the halls by the children of his enemies as he walked to and fro. Couldn't even catch himself from being tripped. He couldn't see. Losing his weakness caused him, I'm sure, weeks and weeks and weeks of pain. You don't pluck somebody's eye out and they go to work the next day. This was a painful recovery, not only physically, but mentally, to realize that he had to have someone lead him to go to the bathroom. He couldn't defend himself. He was renowned for his strength, and he couldn't even fight off little children. Samson, without his strength and without his eyes, is a fully conquered man. He has nothing left to give. But this is the first time in his life when he's finally strong. He was humbled and once again turned and relied on God instead of his own strength. And I want y'all to know something about Samson's story that has always been wonderful to me. He may have lost his strength. He also lost his weakness. But his strength would come back, and his weakness could not. His hair would grow. It would come back. But the thing that got him into this situation and had led him into multiple situations before could not. Physically, that had been dug out of him, right? But we experience that in our own lives when God is doing the pressing down and the shaking together. If you had a cup full of selfishness, God cannot pour love into it without pushing it out. What was there before. Samson's hair grows back, but his eyes don't. God's provision and equipping never left him. Samson's capture becomes his greatest blessing. His weakness was removed and his strength returned. And with this strength and his new, deeper relationship with God, he uttered those words for one last moment of strength. And God granted it. He was able to bring about one of his greatest victories over the enemies of his people than he ever had before, when he was fully mobile, fully had his sight, fully had his strength. And he did more for God's kingdom in one moment during his blindness than he did in his whole life previously. His capture in blindness became his greatest blessing. When you are in a position that you struggle and you look around, remember Samson. What is God removing from you? Is it steak? And you had to have ramen noodles? What did that teach me and my husband? Did we get a little taste of reality? Did we realize that people are sometimes not where they want to be from choices that they did not have the power to make? What strength do you see returning in your life whenever you walk through a time of blindness? One more example from the New Testament. Matthew 21, 18 through 22. This is the fig tree. It's a small story. There's not a lot to it. It's one moment in time with Jesus. Matthew 21, 18 through 22. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." Now there's one other piece of this story that's in Mark 11:13, and it tells us, seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. I've always thought this is a little unfair of Jesus. We now know that it's not the season for figs, but Jesus goes to a fig tree looking for figs. Shocker that he doesn't find any, right? It's not the season for figs. There's no figs. But he curses it. And I was like, you are asking something of the fig tree that it's not even supposed to give. We've all been asked to do too much. There are seasons in your life, maybe when your kids were young. I know Katie, there was about a 4-year period where we rarely talked. She had 3 children. I think she breastfed for 3 years straight. Well, she stair-stepped them. Do you know what I mean? Like she had work to do at home, and she didn't have anything left to give at the end of the day. I know that there was a season with my granny when my gramps became very sick. I didn't get phone calls as regularly from her as I did before. That was a season where she had to take care of him 24 hours a day. He became bedbound at the very end. It's a lot of work. It's not just a lot of work physically. It's a lot of work mentally and emotionally. There are seasons in your life when your parents are old, when you're changing jobs, where you just can't keep up, and something is being asked of you that you cannot produce. But I also look at what Jesus has done in the other parts of the Bible, and I don't understand the fig tree. Jesus told Peter he could walk on water, and he did. Jesus told the winds to be still, and they were. He told the water to calm, and it was. Jesus told 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes that they could feed 5,000 men plus however many women and children were there, and they did. What was wrong with the fig tree? He even said when he came into Jerusalem, if the people didn't cry out, then the very stones would. Has anybody ever heard stones cry out? Clearly they're capable. But they're only capable of that whenever they're in the presence of eternity. When they're in the presence of limitless. So the key to the story of the fig tree is that somehow the fig tree chose to stay subject to its season. It was in the presence of power. And it didn't produce a fig when it was asked. It chose to be limited when it was in the face of a power that was limitless. Jesus asked for figs. It wasn't the season of figs. But the fig was a fruit-bearing tree, and Jesus asked it to bear fruit. I think that's one of the saddest things I've ever discovered in Scripture during this study, because I feel like I do that all the time. I feel like I'm asked to be nice when I don't want to be nice. Kids are going to keep you honest. I keep my brother's kids pretty regularly. He has twins, Abby and Aiden. They are 10. And he has Oliver, who is 7. Abby and Aiden are Josh and Becky's firstborn children. They had twins first time out the gate, right? But they are both very firstborn. They're organized, they're smart, they're goal-oriented, they're driven. They want to know that you approve. Josh and Becky thought they were wonderful, successful parents. And then they had Oliver. And they were humbled. Because Oliver is a no-limit soldier, right? When we would tell the kids, hey, just jump off the trampoline, Abby and Aiden would sit down on their bottoms. They would turn over. They would slide off very carefully. They would feel their toes for the ground, and then they would get off. Oliver, at 2 years old, did a head dive. And somebody needed to catch him. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the difference between these two things. I feel like I'm Abby and Aiden all the time, that I'm so very careful when God has told me that I'm capable. I want to be Oliver. I want to dive in. I want to be adventurous. I want to not yell at people in traffic. If you stop at a yield sign, you are who I'm talking about. I want you to know right now. Are we limiting ourselves unnecessarily? Do you see hard things and experience hard things and try to avoid it? Or at the very least, say that I can't give anything else? Do you allow those hard things to define you and make you bitter or angry or resentful? Do you take away the fruits of the Spirit that God could be growing in you? I know that these are upside down blessings, right? That these are hard things. That they're not, a new comforter. Or the new pair of shoes. Or a haircut that makes you gorgeous. But a lot of times these are a single season, a single situation, a single day, a single hour, a single experience. I want you to know that those hard things cannot take away your joy, your peace, your love, your faithfulness, your goodness, your purpose, or even your ability to bear all of those fruits. This is the blessing that's beyond measure, the God that we serve. Somebody who is able to grow peace in you at the moment when you are at your most anxious. Somebody who's able to grow love and sympathy and understanding in you during the years where you felt like you couldn't breathe. That's the blessing beyond measure. I want to tell you about a God that we serve. One of those things that I read that none of you will ever read. I love the stars. Their vastness and beauty and twinkling amaze me. I don't know if you know this fun fact, a separate fun fact, bonus fun fact, because it's not in my notes. But the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, which is the Little Dipper, is 400 light years away. A light year is how much space light can travel within 1 year of time. 400 light years away. So when you look at the Pleiades, you are seeing light created 400 years ago. You literally look into the past. That's amazing to me. My feet in the present and my eyes in the past. You can be a time traveler. It's not science fiction, right? Anyway, fun fact. But this is the kind of power that holds the stars, that called them into existence and holds them in place. They amaze me, and therefore God amazes me. And I recently read in an article that there were some scientists that were staring into the Orion Nebula in Sagittarius, okay? And we don't need to go into the details of that study, but they were trying to look for what in that area of the galaxy, what we have here in this area of the galaxy. They were looking for amino acids specifically so that they could figure out the starts of life, right? That's not what they found. I was about 60 pages into, really boring, even for me, and I decided to stop, but then I checked, it was only like 65 pages long, and I mean, once you're 5 more pages, let me read the results. Yeah. So I read the results. They did not find amino acids. They found some other stuff, but loads and loads of ethyl formate. They had a few other things that cause the stars to burn, hydrogen and oxygen, but we're looking in the dead area between the stars. What is there? And they figured, we're going to find this list of 100,000 things, and they found this other list that's only 10,000 things, and then this huge amount of ethyl formate. I don't know if y'all know what ethyl formate is. I didn't know either, but I looked it up. It's what makes raspberries taste like raspberries. Ethyl formate is the chemical that makes raspberries taste like raspberries. I was delighted with this. I don't know if y'all can tell, but that super excited me. The universe tastes like raspberries. Isn't that amazing? I'm telling you this so that you can see that the God we serve is all the things we see in the Bible. He's hard to understand in the Old Testament because we see justice, and we see holiness, and we see righteousness, and how that plays out in a world that is unjust, unholy, and unrighteous. And some of those stories are hard to read. And then we see God in the New Testament through the lens of a Savior. And we see boundless love and mercy and even grace. But then I look at creation around us, and I see joy and whimsy and awe. No one knew that the universe's dust clouds taste like raspberries until 2015. We are always discovering the uniqueness and beauty of the world that God gifted to us. Every time you eat a raspberry, you taste the Milky Way. You can literally experience a small part of the grandeur of the universe with a raspberry. That boggles my mind. I know I keep saying it, but I'm still boggled. Also a fun word. This is the God we serve. Loving and gentle, full of joy and whimsy, but also like a good father, not simply willing to remove the hard things from your life. He will choose to let you rely on him during them. And this is the blessing beyond measure. It's really just all about perspective. Let's talk about your ropes that you have in your bag, okay? I know some of y'all know who Francis Chan is. He did something similar, where you have this big long rope. This big long rope is the picture of eternity. You have an eternal soul. This rope wrapped around the room several times. Madison has told me a couple of times how she hates how long that I bought the rope, and that she had to hang it all up multiple times. So, thanks, Madison. Thank you, Madison. But this is a picture of eternity, right? The whole thing, all the way across. This is your life. This one little piece. This is just a drop in the bucket. Francis Chan does this a lot better than me, so y'all go watch the video. But this is the blazing furnace for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this is their eternity with God. This is Samson's blindness. And this is their eternity with God. This is Hagar and her moments of hopelessness. And this is her eternity with God. I need you to reframe your perspective on the pain that we experience here on earth, and to truly see that even in the worst moments, they are meant for your good. I can't help but serve a God that doesn't waste my hurt. So let's look at the key verse again today. It's Luke 6:38. Give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Are you giving of yourself to God today? You have to ask if you're choosing His kingdom even on your bad days, even when you're pressed down, even when you're shaken up or shaken together. Are you reassured by the good things you have when you're experiencing the bad things? Is your cup running over with only the best kinds of blessings, even if it doesn't always look like a blessing at first? How can you measure those things in your life? Even if you have to swallow a teaspoon of weight and fire, what did He grow in you? So, I am blessed beyond measure. Thank you to the ladies of Pine Prairie for everybody who did all the things. I can't even name them all. And the cooks that are in the back. And thank you all for coming.
Yes.